Today we'll be talking about a very important literary strategy or writing strategy called the cumulative sentence. And I want to first start by referencing a book by Italian writer Italo Calvino. It's called Six Memos for the Next Generation. And in this series of lectures that he publishes, one of the last things he publishes, he talks about the idea of exactitude and how it's necessary in writing, whether you're writing essays or fiction, to make sure that your word choice and that the vehicle that you use to put your ideas forward, your sentence structure, is as exact and precise as possible. And that's really the key behind writing a good cumulative sentence. So I want to start with one of his sentences that comes from one of his short stories, and I'll read it to you, and then we'll talk about it a little bit, and then we'll get into what exactly is a cumulative sentence and how does it work for you. So here's a sentence. And the moon, all calm, casting her light without haste, streaked now and then by fine wisps of clouds, which she majestically allowed to fall around her shoulders, and the light traffic light, meanwhile always there, on and off, throbbing with a false vitality that actually weary and enslaved. So this particular sentence is one single sentence, but what we're going to work with is how this writer kind of creates it, forms it, and then why it's a good sentence to kind of put in your tool bag for writing. Okay, so to begin with, you guys probably learned quite a few sentence strategies when you were younger, but they all pretty much revolved around the idea of three types of sentences, or maybe even a fourth, and that was the simple sentence, the compound sentence, the complex sentence, and then something scary called the compound complex. Well, these models are fine for beginning writers, but as you begin to work with your craft a little bit, I think what you'll see is that they're very limiting. And when we think about sentences, that's not really the way we want to go if we're going to try to improve our writing any. So I want to start by starting with like what a basic sentence and how it moves into a cumulative sentence looks like. And so you can see on your screens we have a basic sentence. We start with a very, what we call an independent clause. He grabbed her hand. Very simple idea. It's straightforward. You know exactly what happens there. So what we're going to do around that is we're going to try to add some modifiers to it to really kind of let it be visible and more visible to the reader. So as you look at your screen now, what you'll notice is we changed that to he grabbed her hand, his heart pounding. I've added a modifier after the hand that's describing kind of his state. So now I know a little bit more. I know a couple of things, but I'm still not quite certain. Is he in love? Is he scared? Is she scared? Is he nervous in any way? What exactly is going on with this pounding heart? So I can continue to add modifiers to that as I go, and you'll notice I'm building what's called a cumulative sentence. It accumulates information. These are modifiers that I can surround and I can use to describe either the action that's taking place or one of the nouns or subjects or objects within the sentence. So here's your sentence. He grabbed her hand, his heart pounding, his knees shaking, his head spinning, his palms sweating, his fright slowly fading away. Now, as you look at that sentence, it's awfully long and it's very cumbersome. And so that's not kind of what we want to write. We want to play with that a little bit. So as you kind of look, I'll take you through a little exercise of how we can get this sentence down to something that's very manageable and very clear, or as Calvino says, very precise. So what we want to do is we want to create that opportunity for the reader to see the depth within your idea as well as the precision. So the idea behind any kind of writing is persuasion. You are trying to get across to the audience a claim that you're trying to make, whether you're writing poetry, fiction, an essay for your class, or an op-ed piece, or maybe you're writing a request to receive something from a company. Who knows? You're writing a letter to your boss. So it's that depth and precision that we want to get accomplished without having to, lose the reader because our writing is not up to snuff. All right, so let's look at this sentence. He grabbed her hand, his heart pounding, his knees shaking, his head spinning, his palms sweating, his fright slowly fading away. And we're going to modify by looking at what's going on in here. So what you've got, if I number things out, my main clause, he grabbed her hand, is then supported by 5 different modifiers. Each of those modifiers builds a little more detail into the sentence, and you can kind of see them laid out on your screen right now. So let's move things around a little bit, and let's see how we can create some kind of variation within that simple sentence, by simply just varying the pattern a little bit. And each time I do, you'll notice that there's a slightly different effect on the reader. All right, so now I'm going to take the main clause and I move it from first position to last position. So his heart pounding, his knees shaking, his head spinning, his palms sweating, his fright slowly fading away, he grabbed her hand. So I don't particularly like the word his, because I think while it's repetitive and I do want parallel structure, that's not the kind of parallel structure I want. It's too much for the reader. So let's see what happens when we drop that. It's a little more effective. Heart pounding, knees shaking, head spinning, palms sweating, his fright slowly fading away, he grabbed her hand. See how the suspense builds to that? I've dropped the his. Now I have these very two-word parallel structured modifiers. This is a type of sentence that's cumulative, but it's also known as periodic, because the main clause I've moved from first position to last position. And there's a delay, okay? It takes the reader, it gets wrapped up in the details before you hit them with that final main clause. All right, so let's make another little minor variation. I want to create some suspense, and I just want to move that base clause just a little bit. So now my sentence reads like this. Heart pounding, knees shaking, head spinning, palms sweating. Notice the parallel structure, two-word structure. He grabbed her hand, his fright slowly fading away. Okay, so by moving that final modifier, which doesn't fit with the others, it's not following the same pattern, I've actually created emphasis upon it. So his fright slowly fading away helps us see more clearly like the state that this object is in, this person who's grabbing her hand. Okay. All right, so here's a variation of the cumulative in which I'm going to continue to build some detail with it. I'm going to change my sentences here, but you can see instead of having like modifier, 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 main clause, or some variation of that, I'm going to layer this deeper and deeper, and so each modifier is in turn going to be modified. And what you can do is really build this kind of this web of detail for the reader within a single sentence, and it doesn't have to sound like a litany, like you're like. Have you ever had that response from a teacher that you're sounding very choppy? This is the cure for that. So here's the sentence. He dipped his hands in the bichloride solution and shook them like the fingers of a pianist above the keys. Okay. So each time, if you see on your screen, you'll see that I've labeled it, I've numbered them out. You have your main clause. He dipped his hands in the bichloride solution and shook them. So I have a compound verb. He dipped and he shook. But then I want to describe the shaking motion, a quick shake. Then I'm going even deeper with his fingers down, like the fingers of a pianist above the keys. So now what I've done is I've introduced a simile into that. So that's metaphoric language. And I've moved the reader from just this simple image of someone like a scientist dipping their hands in solution to comparing that scientist to the careful artistry of a pianist. And so it works really well if you're going to be working with metaphors or similes of any. So let's go back to Italo Calvino, and he's a writer that I really admire. He does a lot of these cumulative sentences. So here's one from him again. I have landed in the station tonight for the first time in my life, entering and leaving this bar, moving from the odor of the platform to the odor of wet sawdust in the toilets, all mixed in a single odor, which is that of waiting, the odor of telephone booths, when all you can do is reclaim your tokens because the number called has shown no signs of life. Now, most of us aren't used to writing sentences this big, but I think you can see the advantage of the detail that goes into this and how this can make like a really effective sentence embedded within the text of your paper. And if you vary it by having some shorter sentences surrounding it, those shorter sentences, those periodic sentences you're working on are going to pop even more because now they're going to stand out, okay, among these cumulatives. So if you look on your screen, you'll see everything I've done in a different color is going to show you a different modifier that's taking place. Our main clause I put in a circle there. I have landed in this station, and then you'll see the other items kind of in colors there as they go. Each one modifying either the thing before it or some other previous element within the sentence. It's a beautiful way of doing detail. It's a nice way to learn, a nice tool to pick up as you write your sentences. Okay. So here's the pattern. If you think in terms of mathematics or linearly, on your screen now, what you'll see is a pattern I've numbered out. Number 1 being the main sentence, and then 2 are the detail sentences that refer back to that clause. 3, of course, refers to something to be modified in the number 2 section, and so forth and so on. But you can see the flow and the rhythm of this is training you toward. We've abandoned the main clause at the beginning, and our focus now becomes on those details that come later. This kind of building away from the base is shifting the focus away from that main clause, and is moving it more toward the final elements of the sentence. It creates an emphasis really on the loneliness of the traveler in that sentence example that we had. We can begin to identify it. So I'm going to take this same process one more time, and this is what I'm asking you to practice writing, is a good cumulative sentence that uses details that are all interrelated, but that can be stacked or arranged to modify one another. It's probably a sentence type that you're not used to writing, but I think it's one, if you can master it, can be highly, highly effective for you. So here's our try. Big Al headed back to the grocery store, a long train of toilet paper hanging from his shoes, his mind preoccupied with the recent events of his divorce, like a lost sheep wandering the fields, helpless and alone. Do you see how those last 3 words, the helpless and alone, really get emphasized because of everything that happened before? I've managed to also use a nice metaphor, which is another technique that you want to try to incorporate. You don't want to overdo it, but you definitely want to try to incorporate it when you can. All right. Now, once you learn the cumulative, you'll begin to see it everywhere. Okay, so here's an example. Like F. Scott Fitzgerald, one of the great American writers, was a master at the cumulative sentence. Here's one where he's describing within The Great Gatsby, Daisy's character. All right, here's the sentence. Her face was sad and lovely with bright things in it, bright eyes and bright passionate mouth. But there was an excitement in her voice that men who had cared for her found difficult to forget. A singing compulsion, a whispered listen, a promise that she had done gay, exciting things hovering in the next hour. Now, I haven't talked about punctuation, but one of the things that you can practice punctuating is not exclusively using commas. This is where it's a good point that you can use the colon, you can use a dash. As you separate these modifiers out, those dashes, those colons bring a little bit of style and flair to your sentence, but they'll also help to create emphasis for you on certain sections. It's almost, think of it as like little asides that you want to make. It's almost like commentary that you want the reader to understand by using your punctuation marks to do that. Okay. All right. So that's the lesson for today. Again, it's the cumulative sentence. There's some exercises that you can look at and follow if you want to go to our website, eliteliterarybookgroup.com. You can see under the tools for learning, there's a writing section, and there's a whole area dedicated to the cumulative sentence.